The massive display screen on the Galactic Council's flagship lit up with warning signals. Red lights flashed across the bridge as the crew of blue-skinned aliens rushed to their stations. The ship's automatic defense systems had detected an unknown fleet approaching their position in the outer rim of controlled space. "High Commander, we're picking up unusual energy signatures," reported the sensor officer, his four eyes blinking rapidly as he studied the readings. "The ships don't match any known designs in our database." The High Commander stood from his chair, his tall frame casting a shadow across the holographic display. "Show me," he ordered, his voice deep and measured despite the growing tension. The main screen filled with images of sleek, dark vessels moving in formations unlike anything the Council had ever seen. Their hulls bore strange markings, and their engine signatures pulsed in irregular patterns that made them hard to track. "They're hailing us," announced the communications officer. "The message is being broadcast in multiple formats. They're trying different frequencies and encoding methods simultaneously." The High Commander nodded. "Put it through." A face appeared on the screen. A creature with only 2 eyes, pale skin, and short gray hair. It wore a dark uniform with strange symbols on its shoulders. "This is Admiral Ross of the Earth Defense Fleet. We come in peace and seek diplomatic contact with the Galactic Council." The bridge crew exchanged worried looks. None of them had heard of Earth before. The sensor officer suddenly jumped up. "High Commander, their biological readings. They're impossible. Their bodies contain high levels of metals, and their cellular structure suggests they evolved on a death world with extreme radiation levels." "Weapons?" the High Commander asked sharply. "Their ships are heavily armed, but the weapon systems are unlike anything we've seen. They appear to use primitive projectile technology alongside energy weapons. It doesn't make sense." The High Commander's expression darkened. They had dealt with invasive species before. Creatures that evolved in harsh environments often became the most dangerous threats to civilized space. The combination of unknown technology and death world biology set off every warning signal in his centuries of experience. "This has to be a trick," he decided. "No peaceful species would approach with warships. No civilized race would evolve with such corrupted biology. Weapons officer, target their lead vessel. Show them we won't be fooled." On the human flagship, Admiral Ross watched in confusion as the Council vessel's weapon ports began to open. "They're charging weapons," his tactical officer reported. "Sir, should we raise shields?" Ross kept his voice calm. "Maintain our current stance. Send another transmission. All frequencies. Make it clear we're not here to." The Council ship fired. A burst of plasma energy shot across space, aimed directly at the bridge of Ross's flagship. But the humans had not survived centuries of warfare by being unprepared. The plasma burst passed straight through the flagship's position, hitting nothing but a holographic projection. The real ship was already moving, having detected the weapon charging sequence seconds earlier. "All ships, defensive formation Delta," Ross ordered. "No return fire. I repeat, no return fire. Launch communication buoys. Keep broadcasting our peaceful intentions." The human fleet moved with practiced precision, their ships sliding into new positions faster than the Council's targeting systems could track. Each vessel projected multiple sensor ghosts, making it impossible to tell which ships were real and which were decoys. The High Commander watched in growing alarm as his initial attack failed to hit anything. The human ships were now arranging themselves in a complex three-dimensional pattern that his tactical computers couldn't analyze. They weren't retreating or attacking. They were doing something else entirely. "Sir," his weapons officer called out, voice shaking. They're surrounding us, but not in any attack formation we know. Our targeting systems can't get a lock. There are too many conflicting signals." Another transmission came through, Admiral Ross's voice, steady and firm. "We understand your caution, but we truly come in peace. Our fleet's current formation is called a defensive shield wall. We can protect both our ships and yours, if you'll give us a chance to talk. We have much to share." The High Commander stared at the screen, his millennia-old tactical doctrine crumbling in the face of something entirely new. These humans had turned a battle formation into a defensive gesture, had responded to an attack with an offer of protection. Everything about them defied conventional logic. Captain Jane Smith stood at the helm of the Thunderchild, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. More Council ships had arrived, bringing their total to 15 vessels against the human fleet's 7. Under normal circumstances, those would be terrible odds. But humans had long since learned that numbers alone didn't determine the outcome of a battle. "All ships reporting ready," Captain, her first officer, reported. "The Council vessels are trying to surround us using their standard attack pattern." Jane allowed herself a small smile. The aliens' tactics were almost too predictable, like they were following a textbook that hadn't been updated in 1,000 years. "Send the signal to begin Operation Ghostlight." Across the human fleet, ships began to move in seemingly random patterns. Each vessel's advanced electromagnetic systems activated, creating duplicate sensor signatures that made it appear as if there were dozens of human ships instead of just 7. On the Council's command ship, alarms blared as their sensors struggled to make sense of the situation. "Impossible," shouted their tactical officer. "Their ships are multiplying. No, these must be illusions, but we can't tell which signals are real." The High Commander gripped his chair tightly. In all his years of service, he had never seen anything like this. The humans were turning their ships' energy signatures into weapons, not to attack, but to confuse and disorient. Back on the Thunderchild, Jane received a transmission from Admiral Ross. "Captain Smith, execute Phase 2. Show them what happens when humans get creative." "With pleasure, sir," Jane replied. She turned to her crew. "Begin the lightning dance." The Thunderchild suddenly cut all power, appearing to drift dead in space. The Council ships immediately focused their attention on the seemingly vulnerable vessel. But just as they locked their weapons, the human ship burst to life, its engines flaring brighter than a small sun. The sudden energy surge overloaded the Council ship's sensitive targeting systems. In the few seconds of confusion that followed, the Thunderchild weaved between 3 enemy vessels, its wake disrupting their formation. The maneuver should have been impossible for a ship that size, but the humans had learned long ago that impossible just meant hasn't been tried yet. "Their ships are breaking formation," Jane's tactical officer reported with barely contained excitement. "They don't know how to handle individual ship initiatives. They keep trying to regroup and follow their standard protocols." The Council fleet's rigid command structure was working against them. Each ship waited for orders from their flagship, following preset battle plans that hadn't changed in generations. Meanwhile, the human captains acted independently while coordinating their efforts, each ship moving like a dancer in a deadly ballet. The High Commander watched in growing frustration as his fleet's superior numbers proved meaningless. The humans weren't just surviving. They were controlling the entire engagement without firing a single shot. Their ships moved in ways that defied conventional space combat doctrine, using speed and maneuverability in combinations no Council tactician had ever considered. "Send another warning shot," he ordered, desperate to regain control of the situation. "Show them the consequences of their defiance." A Council cruiser fired its main weapon. The energy beam lanced out toward one of the human ships, only to pass through empty space as the vessel seemed to blink out of existence, reappearing seconds later from an impossible angle. "How are they doing this?" demanded the High Commander. "No species can fight like this." On the Thunderchild's bridge, Jane allowed herself a moment of pride. The Council ships were now completely surrounded, though they hadn't yet realized it. Each human vessel had maneuvered into precisely calculated positions, ready to disable the alien fleet's weapons if necessary, all without causing any casualties. "Message from Admiral Ross," called out the communications officer. He says, "Well done, Captain. Now let's show them why humans believe the best victory is one where nobody dies." Jane nodded and opened a channel to all ships, both human and alien. This is Captain Smith. To the Council fleet, you're currently in a position we call checkmate. We could have destroyed your ships 15 times over. Instead, we chose to demonstrate why peaceful first contact is always the better option. Now, shall we try this again? Our admiral is still waiting to have that diplomatic discussion. The bridge fell silent as they waited for the Council's response. The human crews knew that this moment would either mark the beginning of a new understanding between species or the start of something much darker. But whatever came next, they had proven that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their ships. It was their ability to think differently than anyone else in the galaxy. The Council's military analysis chamber was in chaos. Dozens of analysts from different species crowded around holographic displays, arguing as they watched recordings of the human ship's movements. None of them could make sense of what they were seeing. "Play it again," ordered Chief Analyst Bill, his long fingers moving across the control panel. The recording started over, showing how 7 human ships had outmaneuvered 15 Council vessels without firing a single shot. "It goes against everything we know about space combat," muttered another analyst, his scales changing color with frustration. "Their ships ignore standard attack patterns. Each vessel acts independently, but somehow maintains perfect coordination. It's like they're making up new rules as they fight." Bill studied the movements carefully. In his 50 years as chief analyst, he had never seen anything like it. The humans seemed to treat space combat like a game, using tricks and tactics that should have been suicidal, but somehow worked perfectly. A junior analyst rushed into the chamber, carrying the data crystal. "Sir, we've decoded some of their historical records. You need to see this immediately." The main screen filled with images from Earth's history. The analysts watched in stunned silence as scenes of human warfare played out before them. Unlike every other known species, humans hadn't developed their technology through peaceful evolution. They had fought countless wars, each conflict forcing them to adapt and improve their strategies. "Look at these dates," Bill pointed at the screen. "They went from primitive projectile weapons to space travel in less than 300 years. That's impossible. It took the Council races thousands of years to achieve the same progress." The images kept coming. World wars, Cold Wars, regional conflicts. But mixed with the warfare were scenes of peace treaties, humanitarian aid, and joint military exercises between former enemies. The humans hadn't just learned how to fight, they had learned how to turn enemies into allies. "Their ship's design makes sense now," said a tech analyst, pulling up scans of the human vessels. "See these systems. They're not purely military. Each weapon can be converted for peaceful use. Their ships can fight or rescue or explore, all with the same equipment." Bill nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. They're not just warriors. They're survivors. Their whole history has taught them to be ready for anything. The door slid open again, and the High Commander himself walked in. The analysts scrambled to attention, but he waved them back to their work. "Tell me you have something useful," he demanded. "The Council leaders want answers about these humans." Bill gestured to the displays. "Sir, we've been looking at this all wrong. We thought they were primitive because their technology doesn't match our standards. But their real advantage isn't their tools, it's how they think." He pulled up footage from the recent encounter. "Watch their ships again. Every move they make has multiple purposes. When they created those sensor ghosts, they weren't just trying to confuse us. They were testing our reactions, learning our capabilities, and positioning themselves for either combat or rescue operations." The High Commander frowned. "Rescue operations? In the middle of a battle?" "Yes, sir. Their tactics accounted for every possibility. If we had opened fire, they were ready to disable our weapons. If one of our ships had been damaged, they were positioned to provide immediate assistance. They planned for success and failure at the same time." Another analyst spoke up from his station. "Sir, we've confirmed something else. They're Admiral Ross. He wasn't lying about coming in peace. Their weapons were powered up but never targeted our ships directly, even when we fired on them. They chose to demonstrate their superiority without causing harm. The High Commander stared at the battle recordings, watching how the human ships danced through space like they were performing a carefully choreographed show. How do we defend against an enemy that thinks like this? Bill straightened up, his voice firm. That's just it, sir. I don't think we're dealing with an enemy at all. The humans could have destroyed our ships easily. Instead, they chose to teach us a lesson about making assumptions. They turned a potential battle into a demonstration of their capabilities and their restraint. The chamber fell quiet as everyone considered the implications. The Council had existed for thousands of years, believing they understood everything about warfare and diplomacy. Now, in a single encounter, a new species had shown them just how wrong they were. The High Commander looked around the room at his gathered analysts. Keep working. I want to know everything about how these humans think. The Council needs to decide what to do next, and we can't afford any more mistakes. Ambassador Tom Miller stood before the main display screen in his ship's communication room. He had spent hours preparing for this moment, knowing that his next words could determine the future relationship between humanity and the Galactic Council. To the honored members of the Council, he began, his voice clear and steady. I bring you a gift, the truth about humanity. With a simple hand gesture, he activated the transmission. Across every Council ship, screens lit up with images from Earth's history. But unlike the fragments the Council had decoded earlier, this was humanity's complete story, battles and triumphs alike. We will hide nothing from you, Tom continued. This is who we are. This is how we learned. This is why we fight the way we do. The Council members watched in silence as centuries of human history played before them. They saw ancient battles with swords and shields, the development of gunpowder, the horrors of world wars, and the birth of nuclear weapons. But between the conflicts, they also saw something unexpected: progress. After each war, Tom explained, we built something better. Weapons became tools. Enemies became friends. Military technology gave us medicine, space travel, and new ways to help people. On the Council's flagship, the High Commander watched with growing interest. The human wasn't just showing their victories. He was showing their mistakes, their failures, and how they learned from them. This is how we train our ship's crews, Tom said as the display showed modern space combat exercises. Every officer must study both war and peace. They learn how to fight, but more importantly, they learn when not to fight. The images shifted to show humanitarian missions. Council members leaned forward as they watched human warships delivering aid to disaster zones, rescuing stranded crews from disabled vessels, and protecting civilian ships from pirates. Your weapons officer noticed our ships carry multiple weapon systems, Tom continued. That's because we believe every tool should have more than one use. The same energy beam that could disable your shields can also clear space debris or provide emergency power to a damaged ship. In the Council's analysis chamber, Bill nodded with understanding. Everything they had observed about human tactics suddenly made sense. The humans hadn't developed their technology to dominate others. They had created it to be ready for anything. Tom's voice remained steady as he delivered the most important part of his message. We know our history of conflict frightens you. We know our biology marks us as creatures from a harsh world. But look again at our actions today. When you fired on us, we chose not to harm you. When you threatened us, we showed you our strength through protection, not destruction. The display showed the recent encounter from the human ship's perspective. The Council members could now see how carefully planned each movement had been, how the humans had positioned themselves to protect the Council ships from their own weapon backwash. This is what humanity has learned through all our wars and struggles, Tom said. The strongest position isn't the one that lets you destroy your enemy. It's the one that lets you turn an enemy into a friend. He paused, letting his words sink in. In the silence, many Council members found themselves reconsidering their initial judgments about these strange beings from a death world. "We don't ask you to trust us blindly," Tom continued. "We've shown you our worst moments alongside our best. We've revealed military secrets that other species would die to protect. We do this because we believe understanding is the first step toward peace." The High Commander stood up from his chair. For the first time since the humans had appeared, he felt like he truly understood them. They weren't just warriors or diplomats. They were survivors who had learned to be both, and neither, as the situation required. "You see us clearly now," Tom concluded. "We are not simple beings. We are not purely peaceful, nor are we mindlessly violent. We are human. We have learned through conflict how to value peace. We have discovered through war how to protect life. And now we ask you, will you learn with us?" The transmission ended, leaving the council chambers in thoughtful silence. The human ambassador had done something unprecedented in council history. He had turned complete honesty into a diplomatic weapon more powerful than any fleet. The warning sirens blared without warning across both human and council ships. Space itself seemed to tear open as 5 massive vessels emerged from what looked like holes in reality. Their hulls were black as space itself, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. "Unknown ships detected," shouted the sensor officer on the council flagship. "Their weapons are hot, and they're firing." Before anyone could react, beams of sickly green energy lanced out from the mysterious vessels. The attacks weren't aimed at any particular ships. They were firing in all directions, showing neither strategy nor concern for their targets. The High Commander froze for a moment, his training useless against such random aggression. But the humans were already moving. "All council vessels, this is Admiral Ross," a calm voice cut through the chaos. "Pull your ships into formation behind us. Captain Smith, execute Protocol Omega. Everyone else, defensive positions." The Thunderchild shot forward, its engines glowing bright enough to blind sensors. Behind it, the other human ships moved with perfect coordination, creating a protective wall between the Council fleet and the attackers. "They're sacrificing themselves to protect us," whispered the High Commander, watching as the human ships took hits meant for Council vessels. But the humans weren't just playing defense. Even as they shielded the Council ships, they were mounting a counterattack unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. On the Thunderchild's bridge, Captain Smith barked orders. "Launch the boarding pods. Target their engine sections. Show them what happens when humans get up close and personal." The Council watched in disbelief as small objects shot out from the human ships, threading their way through the chaos of battle. The mysterious attackers, focused on their wild firing patterns, didn't even notice the pods until they were already attached to their hulls. "Impossible," shouted Bill from the analysis chamber. "No one attempts boarding actions in space combat. The risks are—" His voice trailed off as the first reports came in. Human boarding teams had cut their way into 3 of the 5 enemy ships. Unlike the Council's ceremonial boarding tactics, the humans moved with brutal efficiency, using centuries of close-quarters combat experience. "Main weapons disabled on hostile ships 1 and 3, reported the Thunderchild's tactical officer. "Our teams are moving to their engine rooms. Captain, they're encountering heavy resistance, but they're laughing about it." Indeed, the comm channels were filled with human voices making jokes even as they fought their way through the enemy vessels. It was a sound no council member had ever heard before. Warriors finding joy in the challenge of combat while still maintaining perfect discipline. The remaining 2 enemy ships tried to concentrate their fire on the human fleet, but they couldn't hit what they couldn't predict. The human vessels moved in patterns that seemed random, but somehow always placed them exactly where they needed to be. "Admiral," called out Captain Smith, "permission to demonstrate our point defense capabilities." "Granted, Captain. Show them why humans believe the best defense is a good offense." The Thunderchild's outer hull suddenly bristled with dozens of small turrets. Instead of firing energy weapons, they released clouds of tiny metal objects. Simple bullets, fired with incredible precision. The Council watched in amazement as this primitive projectile technology shredded the enemy ship's sensor arrays and weapon ports. "They're shields," gasped a council technician. "The projectiles are too small and too numerous. The shields can't adapt." Within minutes, the battle had turned completely. 3 enemy ships were under human control, their crews locked in their own brigs. The 4th ship was drifting, its weapons and engines disabled by precisely targeted projectile fire. The 5th tried to escape back through its reality tear, but found its path blocked by a wall of human ships working in perfect coordination. The High Commander stood silently on his bridge, watching as the humans efficiently neutralized a threat that would have devastated his fleet. They had protected the Council ships, captured enemy vessels, and controlled the entire battle space using tactics that defied conventional wisdom. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "the humans are hailing us." Admiral Ross says, "He says this is what they call a teaching moment, and would we like to observe how they secure and study captured enemy technology?" For the first time since the humans had appeared, the High Commander smiled. Perhaps it was time for the Council to learn some new tricks. The Council's grand meeting chamber had never been so crowded. Representatives from every member species gathered to witness something unprecedented, a detailed analysis of human combat capabilities. The High Commander stood at the center, with Admiral Ross and Captain Smith beside him. "What you're about to see," the High Commander announced, "will change everything we thought we knew about warfare and peace." The main display activated, showing footage from the recent battle. The chamber filled with gasps as they watched human ships and crews in action. But this time, the footage included detailed explanations of their tactics. "Notice how their ships never follow predictable patterns," the High Commander explained. "Each movement serves multiple purposes. When the Thunder Child spun to dodge enemy fire, it was also positioning itself for a counterattack while creating a sensor shadow for other ships to exploit." Admiral Ross stepped forward. "We call it tactical flexibility. Every human crew member is trained to think independently while working as part of a team. Our ships can break formation without losing coordination because we trust our people to make good decisions." The display showed the boarding action next. Council members watched in amazement as human teams cut through the enemy ships' hulls and fought their way inside. Some representatives looked uncomfortable at the violence, but they couldn't deny its effectiveness. "You're probably wondering why we still train for hand-to-hand combat in an age of space warfare," Captain Smith said, noting their reactions. "It's because humans believe in being prepared for everything. We never assume our technology will always work." A council member stood up. "But how do you maintain such aggressive capabilities while remaining peaceful?" "Our studies show that species with strong military traditions eventually destroy themselves." Admiral Ross smiled. "That's because you're thinking of peace and war as opposites. Humans learned they're two sides of the same coin. Our history taught us that the best way to prevent war is to be very, very good at it, while always looking for peaceful solutions first." The display shifted to show the captured enemy ships. Human crews were efficiently stripping them down, studying their technology while keeping the prisoners comfortable and well treated. "Even now," Captain Smith explained, "we're learning. These ships use technology we've never seen before, but instead of just copying their weapons, we're studying how to defend against them and how to adapt their drive systems for peaceful exploration." The High Commander nodded. "This is what impressed us most. The humans don't just fight differently. They think differently. They turn enemies into teachers, weapons into tools, and battles into learning experiences." The chamber erupted in discussion as council members debated what they were seeing. Some were frightened by human capabilities, others were fascinated by their adaptability. But none could deny that humanity had shown them something new. "There's one more thing you need to understand," Admiral Ross said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Everything we've shown you, every tactic, every technique, every bit of technology, is just the beginning. Humans never stop learning, never stop improving." He gestured to the display, which now showed the human fleet in formation. "Those reality tiers the enemy ships used. Our scientists are already studying how to detect them earlier. The way their shields failed against our bullets. That's teaching us new ways to improve our own defenses. We take every experience, good or bad, and learn from it. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just dealing with a species that had different military tactics. They were facing the civilization that had turned adaptation itself into an art form. Captain Smith stepped forward. "We know some of you are afraid of us. You look at our weapons, our tactics, our history of conflict, and you see a threat. But look closer. Every advancement we made through warfare, we turned toward peace. Every battle technique we mastered, we adapted to save lives." The High Commander raised his hand for attention. The Council must now decide how to proceed. But consider this. The humans have shown us capabilities we never imagined, yet they used them first to protect us, then to teach us. Perhaps it's time we stopped fearing their differences and started learning from them instead. Around the chamber, heads nodded in agreement. The humans had done more than prove their worth. They had shown the Council a whole new way of thinking about strength, peace, and progress. The mood in the Council's Great Hall was different today. Where there had once been fear and suspicion of the humans, now there was anticipation. The Council's 500 representatives gathered to witness something unprecedented: the creation of a new type of membership within the Galactic Council. Admiral Ross stood at the center of the hall, his dress uniform gleaming under the lights. Beside him, Captain Smith and Ambassador Tom Miller waited calmly as the Council leaders approached with their final decision. After much discussion, the head counselor began, her voice carrying across the silent chamber. "We have realized that standard council membership would be insufficient for humanity's unique capabilities." She paused, looking around the Great Hall. "Instead, we offer something new. We ask humanity to become not just members, but teachers. We want you to help reform our military and diplomatic protocols, to show us how to think differently." Admiral Ross exchanged glances with his companions. This was more than they had hoped for. A chance not just to join the galactic community, but to help shape its future. "We accept," Ross said, "on one condition." He stepped forward, his voice strong and clear. "The Council must adopt Earth's principle of peace through strength and understanding. This means no more shooting first at unknown ships. No more assuming different means dangerous." The head counselor nodded. "Agreed. In fact, we've already begun implementing changes based on your example. Would you like to see?" The main display lit up, showing a new class of council ships under construction. Their designs clearly showed human influence, more versatile, more adaptable, built to handle both peace and conflict with equal skill. But ships are just the beginning. The head counselor continued. "We want to learn everything. Your training methods, your tactical flexibility, your way of turning combat techniques into rescue operations. Most importantly, we want to understand how you maintain your warrior skills while preferring peace." Captain Smith stepped forward. "That's easier to show than explain. Request permission to demonstrate." At the head counselor's nod, Smith activated her communicator. "Thunderchild, execute training protocol Delta." The Great Hall's windows showed a spectacular view of space, where the Thunderchild had been waiting. The human ship suddenly began a series of complex maneuvers, but this time it was joined by 3 council vessels. Together, they performed an intricate dance that would have been impossible just weeks ago. 2 days of training, Smith said proudly. That's all it took for their crews to start thinking creatively. They're already developing their own variations on our tactics. Ambassador Miller smiled. "That's the real secret of humanity's strength. We don't just teach, we learn from those we teach. Every species brings new ideas, new perspectives. Together, we all become stronger." The head counselor raised her hands, calling for attention. "Then let it be recorded. From this day forward, humanity joins the Galactic Council not as subordinates, not as equals, but as guides. Their first task will be to help establish the new Combined Defense and Diplomatic Court, where ships and crews from all species will train together. Admiral Ross stepped forward one last time, and our first lesson will be this. The most dangerous weapon in the universe isn't a gun or a ship or a fleet. It's a mind that refuses to learn new things. But the strongest shield isn't a defense screen or a battle fleet. It's understanding between different peoples. The Great Hall erupted in applause. Around the chamber, representatives from hundreds of worlds rose to their feet. They had come expecting to debate whether humans should be allowed to join their civilization. Instead, they found themselves celebrating the beginning of a new era. Outside, the Thunder Child and the council ships finished their dance with a maneuver that would have been considered impossible just days ago. Their contrails formed a pattern in space, not a symbol of war or peace, but something new, something that represented both and neither, just like the humans who had taught them to see space combat in a new way. The pattern slowly faded, but its meaning remained clear. The galaxy was changing. The humans had arrived not as conquerors or supplicants, but as teachers who were eager to learn. And in doing so, they had shown everyone a new path forward, one where strength and peace weren't opposites, but partners in the dance of civilization.